Hi, my name is Preston Stewart. I live in Tennessee in the United States. My background is in the military. Spent some time in field artillery units and active duty. And a few years ago, about 5, 6 years ago, started making content online discussing military history. When the war in Ukraine kicked off, I tried to provide some insight as to what was happening there to folks that were learning for the first time about some of these weapon systems and what militaries and what war looks like. And since then, it's kind of become a full time job. So this is what I do all day, every day now is try to keep folks informed about what's happening around the world when it comes to war and conflict, be it Ukraine, Israel, Gaza for a while there, of course, Syria, anywhere that things might be happening. But of course, a lot of the focus has been on Ukraine.
Recently, you traveled to Ukraine. What was the first thing that surprised you when you arrived to Ukraine?
It's cold, very cold. Went right about the New Year, so we got over there at the end of December, beginning of January. And Tennessee in the United States is pretty warm all year round, so I wasn't really ready for that. Thought that just some pants and a light jacket would do. It didn't. So quickly learned my lesson and was bundled up all day, every day from there forward. But the thing that stood out to me was in the lead up to the trip. I didn't there were a lot of things that could go wrong. There's a lot of travel to get there. And I didn't want to make any promises that I couldn't keep in terms of meeting up with people. So we just didn't tell very many folks in Ukraine that I was going to be there. But we did tell some. And I think every single one of them offered their house, their car, their time, at the very least, recommendations on where to go. And can I look at your route and give you suggestions on, it was, the hospitality was wild. Like we did before I arrived on ground. We had everything set on where we were staying, start to finish. But we had, more than enough invitations. We could have stayed at a different house everywhere we went because everybody that we spoke with before, during, and after was so generous, so hospitable.
I wonder, during your trip to Ukraine, was there a moment when you thought, okay, Americans have no idea what this really looks like?
A couple times, I'd say. Now, when I first got into Kyiv, something I was very interested in paying attention to was the dynamic of how people operate on a day-to-day basis while there's a war going on. It was hard for me to make that connection in Kyiv because we just got off the train and it looked like a normal big city. It's just a city. There's more soldiers around, but other than that, you wouldn't really be able to tell in the middle of the day that there was a war going on. When we moved through Kharkiv, it hit a little more. We drove through at night, so the curfew was in place and it was just empty. So to see a city that size just shut down, like nobody on the roads was something. And then we were able to contrast that with, we went to, I don't know if it's the mall or one of the big malls in Kharkiv, beautiful, huge. And we went around, took some pictures to send home to my daughter because there were kids' play structures in there and restaurants, and seeing that dynamic where I think it was the next night there was a missile attack it hit a cafe in Kharkiv. So that is happening in the same place as like a very normal, nice mall. Like if you just popped into that moment, you wouldn't think anything about a war going on. But everybody that was there goes back that night and has to deal with missiles and drones flying overhead. That's you can't. I don't think you can appreciate that or understand that until you live through it. And I still do, I can't. I could see it, but can't understand what that's like.
There's currently a lot of people from other countries coming to Ukraine, offering different support or help. But what did people in Ukraine ask you when they found out you were from the United States?
There weren't any asks at all. It was handshakes. There was a lot of something that I thought was great was we spent a lot of time with soldiers. The focus was going to see some of the soldiers that we've supported on the channel or interviewed on the channel, and they wanted to show off what they were doing. Understandably so. I get it. I'd be showing off what I was working on too if I was them. So be it the drones or the UGVs or the FPVs, the manufacturing facilities, the command posts, they just wanted to show what it was they were doing. And there was no ask with it. No, can you share this? Can you talk about this? Can you, fundraise for this, that, or the other? It was the complete opposite, to where I left with more stuff than I went with. I've got a shelf full of, flags and patches and plaques and things they were handing out left and right. And yeah, it was very much a look at what we're doing. And I want to share. I did. I shared as much as I possibly could because I think it's incredible. But those were the interactions was check out this cool thing. And it was.
And speaking of your personal experience, did anything you saw on the ground completely change your opinion about the war? For example, something that made you go like, "Man, I never even imagined this."
We drove out east again, trying to see some of the soldiers. So we spent some time in Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, and I look at a map of the war a lot. It's one of the it's one of the kind of always open tabs on the screen, just to kind of see where things are happening. So I'm familiar with what that looks like out there. It hit entirely different driving that road that's now covered in drone nets, or and just seeing that's how the soldiers are being supplied and recognizing how difficult that is. That we drove in from Izium from the north, so we saw that connection, and then we drove out to the west, full of farm roads and 2-lane, 1.5-lane roads at times, right, dirt roads in some cases. That hit. I didn't realize how tenuous the positions were out there in the east, how difficult it's going to be and is right now to get a lot of supplies in and necessary things out, right? I mean, it's getting 18-wheelers into some of those locations isn't possible. Getting wounded out can take a long time. So seeing that in person definitely changed my perspective of how difficult the situation is in the East right now.
Is there some sort of hard truth about this war that nobody wants to say out loud?
People are saying everything about anything these days, so I don't know that there's anything going unsaid. I would say, if pushed on that, I would say that, especially in the West, we might not be willing to accept how long this could take. I think we, for any number of reasons, don't want to get involved in something long term. We're a bit snake bitten from the global war on terror that just indefinitely went on for 20 plus years. You could probably even go back to Vietnam. And I think that when you look at the front lines and how they've moved and how the war has progressed, most things point to this war going on for quite a while. And I think that's the truth. I think that's what most people see. I don't think very many folks are looking at this saying next month is the time this is all going to wrap up. And that's a hard sell to get involved with something knowing that, is it going to last? I mean, I'll get this question regularly, and I'm sure you do as well. Is it going to end this year? I don't know. It might not. And I think that's hard for people to commit to.
As a former artillery officer, what did you notice right away about how Ukrainians fight?
They're adapting. So artillery is actually a great example for this. I was a light artillery guy for a little while. So I was a forward observer calling in the strikes. And then I went to a HIMARS unit before HIMARS were, everybody thought they were cool. So it was back in 2019 before the full scale invasion kicked off. But what I noticed coming at it from kind of an artillery perspective is in the opening months, even years of the war, a lot of the focus was on this being an artillery war, was a term being used pretty regularly. The airspace had been shut down, and it very quickly turned into who has more shells. What is the shell advantage? How many howitzers? How many barrels is Russia going to be able to produce? How many artillery munitions can the United States manufacture this year? I mean, that was the hot topic, and a lot of folks were kind of pinning the outcome of the war based off of artillery, not just capabilities, but quantities. And that, as an artillery guy, it was kind of interesting and nice to be, my branch is the center of focus. But that changed, and that's really not the conversation anymore. That shift, that is not a fight that Ukraine would want to participate in. That's not a fight that the United States wants to participate in. Russia, their strength has been, manpower, but artillery. My God, they have so many rounds, so many systems. That's the fight that they wanted. And what I noticed in that realm was Ukraine shifted away from that. So for a few months or years, you kind of had to fight what was in front of you, and that was artillery war. And they've moved on. I mean, HIMARS is still being used. Artillery is still being used all day, every day. It is still very, very important to the battlefield. But more and more, Ukraine has been able to shift this from that Russian advantage, arguably, to a different type of fighting, which is whatever you want to call it, the longer standoff zones, the drones. So the adaptation in the artillery space has been interesting.
It was predicted that Russia would eventually have its storages, its artillery storages depleted. It will run out of resources in terms of artillery, in terms of their howitzers. And today in 2026, we can basically see this. But in your personal opinion, is it because they actually depleted their artillery resources, or is it because of drones, because the very warfare shifted, or because of both?
I think at this point, you're looking at the combination of a lot of factors. No doubt, look, I wish and I thought that sanctions were going to have a bigger hit on Russia than they did, but we can't write that off entirely. It's done something. It has made it harder, at the very least, to produce some of these items. So there's that. There's getting the appropriate labor into the factories to be able to churn out the munitions at an appropriate rate. There's increased consumption. There's, of course, plenty of them getting destroyed. And no doubt they're getting destroyed faster than they're being produced. So I think at this point, passing the 4-year mark, you probably can roll all of those together. In the last 12 months, it probably has to do with the destruction. There's definitely been a lot of artillery pieces blown up with drones. And it's something that I think sometimes we lose sight of is you get this 8-second clip of a drone flying into a grad system and it blows up and it's gone, and then you move on and you're on to the next thing. But that MLRS system costs millions of dollars to put together, dozens of people over the course of months to weeks, months to manufacture one. And then you got this 8-second clip of it going up in flames. It takes a long time to rebuild that stuff in the best of circumstances. It's, of course, not best case circumstances for Russia right now. So I don't know that I'd put a percentage on any one of those, but I think all of those together, they are taking their toll in some way, and artillery production could very well be one of them.
Preston, what about the North Korea? Because we know that Russia basically turned the DPRK into its big military hub for production of their shells and artillery. Can North Korea replace the losses in terms of artillery for Russia?
Maybe. I don't know that North Korea has heavy stockpiles. I don't know what the North Korean manufacturing capacity looks like. I would guess that Russia is still able to outproduce North Korea month to month. But they have, and they probably will continue to be able to tap into those stockpiles to use them. Again, artillery is an aspect here. It's not, I would argue that it's not the defining piece of the conflict. So Russia has had to find these other ways to keep their munitions rolling. I'm sure you remember this, but at the beginning of the war, there was concern that China would be filling that role. And we're talking about a completely different conflict at this point. If the Chinese market is just wide open in terms of military production to Russia, it's not comparable. I mean, it's, again, hard to imagine what this would be today. So if Russia has to look to North Korea to fill those gaps, okay, they're probably going to be doing it at a lower rate. From what I've seen, the North Korean shells, the quality there is not ideal. Like munitions going off in the barrel, plenty of them not detonating on impact. Again, it's something. It's probably better than nothing, but I don't think that is going to be a major change. The other way around, though, I think North Korea has come out of this very well, unfortunately. They've been able to send some guys over, get their training, and head right back with really no repercussions. That's unfortunate to see, and I think that should get more attention than it does.
And returning to China, we know that China supported Russia with technology, with drones, with satellite intelligence, with golf carts and cheap bikes and stuff like that. But how do you think why China wasn't involved more in supplying Russia, for example, openly with artillery, with APCs, with tanks, etc., etc.?
China's kind of doing China, where they just sit by quietly, play both sides when possible. I mean, I heard a story recently of somebody from a Ukrainian delegation going to tour a factory in China, and then later that afternoon, someone from Russia was touring the same factory. So China, yeah, it's pretty clear at this point they will sell to anybody. They don't really care. I think they just have a lot to gain and more to lose by going all in with Russia. China hasn't really been negatively impacted all that much by this war. I mean, they've not been the focus of sanctions or any additional economic measures, anything like that. Certainly no military action taken against China. If they were to go all in on Russia's side, which Russia no doubt wants, whenever any chance they could get, it would put them in that camp. Instead, I think they're having the opportunity to just sell equipment to whoever they want. Russia, I mean, no matter what, is in a weaker state today than they were 4 years ago, more dependent on China. And the longer this continues, the more they'll rely, the more of an upper hand China will have with, say, reconstruction or rebuilding some factories inside of Russia, whatever it might be. So, we do view China and Russia here in the United States. We view China as Russia as close allies. I think yes, but I don't think China would really care all that much if Russia just suffered for the next 5, 10, 15 years, and China could kind of take advantage of that gap.
And speaking of Russia, which is undoubtedly today is in much weaker state, much weaker position than 2, 3 years before. Every time when you hear, for example, opinion makers defending Russia's position or spreading Russian narratives and saying that we should trade with Russia, for example, like some of the German far-right politicians, we should trade with Russia, buy their gas, and yada yada. Do you think they talk about that because Russia is running out of time?
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah. Well, anytime there's a comparison of kind of choosing Russia or the European Union, I always think that's a little bit silly. It just doesn't make sense. No matter how frustrated people might get with our friends in London or Paris or Brussels or wherever, it is light years different than what Russia has to simply from an economic standpoint. It's light years different. That might be. We've definitely seen a lot of focus in the Trump administration on restoring trade, restoring economic ties. I don't think there's a big stomach for that. Again, the argument hasn't been what exactly are we getting out of that? You've seen Dmitriev, I'm sure recently, I can't remember the number, 19 trillion or something just completely made up. That'll be, I mean, it's a completely made up number. There's no basis in reality for that. That's probably one of the angles that is appealing to Trump. So that's probably one way to look at it is if he thinks there's a big economic incentive on the back end, then he's more likely to maybe force a deal through. It's probably why you're ending up with these fake, again, 19 trillion. Nobody knows where that came from, but it made headlines. So I'll bet it's probably a little bit of that. I don't know that I would automatically assume that means that Russia is in a weakened state. I think they're just trying to, if you're Russia, why not take any opportunity to try to get Ukraine's allies to force Ukraine into a bad situation? I wouldn't view it all that differently from what we've seen from Russia in the last couple of years, really.
I wonder, did you lose viewers or friends because you openly support Ukraine?
I've had a couple. Yeah, I don't know about viewers. It's hard because, well, you know how the YouTube algorithm and everything works. Somebody will come in for the very first time and say, I've been here for 6 years. It's like, I haven't been making videos for 6 years. I don't know where you were. And I'm out. I hate this guy now. So hard to judge there. Subscriber numbers overall, just, I mean, they're trending up. So it's hard to look at that. Maybe have lost some. On the personal side, there's been some frustrating conversations, I would say. Some folks that it was frustrating to me that were very quick to believe some nonsense online and they wouldn't believe me. For instance, we did a campaign for the Azov International Battalion about a year or 6 months ago or something like that. And I had a friend, someone that I've interacted with for a long time and helped out a lot in the content space, say, I never expected you to be the one supporting Nazis. I was like, well, hold on. Are we going to go with what you hear on the internet, or are you going to listen to your friend that we've been in touch with for years? And he wasn't really interested in that. So, yeah, there's been a little bit. I think the bigger reason is that it's become very political here in the United States, unfortunately, more in the last probably 2 years, where there's been a bit of a divide, where folks view anything in support of Ukraine, even saying we should sell more weapons, as being Democrat or left side of the aisle. And we're just in a bad spot politically here in the US where that's then an enemy. of some folks. So yeah, there's been a little bit, but nature of the beast, I guess. It's going to happen.
And do you ever worry about being misunderstood or labeled as biased?
Yeah, all the time. Because I mean, we are right. The example I give is I only speak English, so I can read a lot of translated text, but I can't listen to podcasts from Russia. I can't watch YouTube channels that are in Ukrainian. So like I'm already missing a lot. I know that my intake is very heavily English focused. Uh, so every video, all the time, I'm thinking about how the bias comes across. That's not something I can handle as much. Where I try to address that is just, if possible, here's what each side is saying about something. Um, I will insert my personal opinion. I generally try to make it known, like, hey, here's my personal assessment of what's happening. But I think bias, no doubt, just the nature of all of us being biased. I think in what I've seen, what folks are most interested in is being genuine and honest. So I was in the U.S. military up until like a year ago, the reserve, so like part time. Like I think the United States is awesome. I think we're great. I think our military is a wonderful place. I think we have a lot of adversaries around the world. I think Russia is one of those adversaries. So like people watching the content, that bias is coming with it. I think more than seeking unbiased, people are looking for genuine and honest is probably my takeaway at this point.
And what is the hardest part about explaining the war honestly on a YouTube?
It doesn't always go well. There's not always good news. It's at times, day to day, it's hard to figure out what exactly to talk about. Maybe is another good way to play into this, because there's unlimited things happening. Even if I said today I'm going to make a video about Ukraine, Russia, there's 800 things that have happened in the last 12 hours that are worthy of discussing. So I already have to narrow that down to something coherent that the audience is interested in, that I also think is important. So trying to find that line is a challenge every single day. But within that, sometimes if Russia fails some major attack, that's going to do well. But that doesn't happen every day. There's also a lot of drone strikes in Ukraine that hit cities. That's big news. That's not good. And I have to imagine people just keeping up with the war, it wears on you. And I understand saying that from a bit of a privileged space because it's people watching rather than experiencing it. And it's not comparable. But, one day there might be a really good piece of information that is exciting and optimistic. And the next day there might not be. It might all be negative or bad news or troubles on the horizon. I think that can wear you down emotionally, I would imagine.
Speaking of the perspectives, where do you think this war is heading in the next year or two?
I think we've got a pretty good look in the last few months of what the rest of 2026 will look like. I imagine that the peace talks will continue largely how they have. We're going to continually be looking for the next month and the next 2 months. And is Putin going to meet with Zelensky, and is Trump going to be there? We're going to hear all of those same conversations again through 2026, but the core issues haven't been resolved. So it's just going to be probably not any different situation a year from now than it is today. I don't see any movement on territorial control or security guarantees. Maybe we get there, but I'd just be guessing at this point. It doesn't seem like we've made any progress. In terms of the war, I think what we're probably going to see is, again, very similar to the last few months, Ukraine conducting limited counterattacks in certain areas to take advantage of overextended Russian lines, because I think that's happening in more places than we originally thought. Again, Zaporizhia right now, Pokrovsk to a degree, up in Kupiansk a few months ago. I think we'll see a lot of that where it can be a headline for Ukraine. It can be embarrassing for Russia. Ukraine can reset the lines, and it comes at relatively low cost compared to a large-scale offensive. I think that plays to Ukraine's advantage, and I think we'll see just a doubling and tripling down of the drone wall. I mean, the defense minister talking about 50,000 casualties or dead a month. That's not coming with machine guns or tanks or probably even artillery. That's going to be the drones mostly in the east. So I would expect that we see a doubling or even tripling, maybe not of the drone units, but of the capabilities out there in that area. That to me is what the whole next year will probably look like.
How do you think, in case this moment comes when Putin looks at the map and realizes that his troops don't move further and he doesn't have enough people to replace the losses in the units on the ground, will it actually push him to negotiate and maybe even agree to some demands from Ukraine?
It's very hard to see Putin making any concessions right now. And I don't think he has an accurate depiction on the battlefield, but I also don't think he really cares. I think the war has entrenched his power in a lot of ways. And going back from this, I mean, we can already see the hyper nationalist extremist views inside of Russia. They want all of Ukraine. And anything short of that, they're going to be livid. Does Putin really want to deal with that in the aftermath? How is he going to explain that away? And even on a smaller scale, we've seen in the negotiations recently, they've limited it to Luhansk and Donetsk. But how many inside of Russia? I mean, we don't even have to call them hardliners at this point. How many of the average citizens are going to say, what about Zaporizhia and Kherson? Are we going to leave our brothers behind that are now Russian territory? It's a mess. And I mean, I don't think they're going to take the rest of Donetsk this year, let alone, can you imagine them trying to cross the river again? Right. So he's boxed himself in a little ways. I'm not super optimistic that he would come around to his terms. I almost have to think of what comes next after him. And maybe, again, this is a Western assessment. My assessment has been horribly wrong here. Maybe we'll get to a point where there are enough casualties that the people speak up and say enough's enough. I would have put that number, I mean, at a fraction of where we are today, like 10, 20,000. I would have thought that the population would have said, what the hell are we doing here? This is insane. We're not there now. So hopefully we get to a point like that. But I think there's going to have to be a lot of internal and probably external pressure for Putin to do anything. And I'm not seeing that right now.
And realistically, do you think that Putin can take control over the whole Ukraine with current dynamic, with current speed of movement, using only military measures, or he would need some kind of external support, some kind of external pressure on Ukraine to make it happen?
He can't take all of Ukraine. It's not even, again, I don't even think he's going to be able to take Donetsk this year. And there's only 10 or 15% of the territory there still held by Ukraine. The challenge here is twofold, because one, we've seen Ukraine stand up their defensive capabilities and start to build in defensive networks back and back. So Russia would need a collapse of the Ukrainian army that has been widely predicted for 4 years, but we have not yet seen. And not only is that kind of one-off situation needing to happen, you would then need a new Russian military that is able to move forward and exploit those gains. So if you think about two sides kind of facing off, if one runs away, the other side still has to move forward. The Russian military right now, I mean, take any one of these areas, they're not able to push very fast or very far at all. If the Ukrainian military, was it the 7th Rapid Response Corps down in Pokrovsk, said, we're out of here, and they went back 100 kilometers, how long would it take the Russian forces to even get to that point? I mean, I don't know that they have the vehicles and the equipment and the logistics to pull all that forward. So, no, I don't think taking Ukraine is in the cards near term or even long term militarily.
If you could send one message directly to Ukrainians watching this, what would you say?
A lot of people still care. The headlines are difficult at times. And I know in the U.S. politics, there's a lot of up, down, and sideways, and that can be challenging. But I assure you, a lot of people do genuinely care. They're thinking of you. They want the best. They're following it. And our politics do change. But it never, in best of times or worst of times, speaks for every single American. So just know that there are a lot of people here very much on your side, very much wanting to see Ukrainian victory.